In June 2007, visitors to the Paris Air Show had the opportunity to witness history in the making. There, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries officially revealed their plans for a homegrown Japanese passenger jet. Seating between 70 and 90 passengers, it would be the first airliner the country had produced since the 1960s. As well as a full-scale cabin mock-up, there was a 1 to 20 scale model of the aircraft itself. At this point, the project was admittedly in its early days, but hopes were high. The Japanese government had already invested $420 million in the plane's development. A year later, in 2008, Mitsubishi officially launched its regional jet program with 25 orders on the books. Certification was scheduled for 2012. But this initial flush of optimism didn't last very long. Within a few years, the project was reporting delay after delay. Test flights were grounded, and there were massive holdups for design changes. By 2023, costs had spiraled to over $7.5 billion, and in the end, it was all for nothing. So join us today as we learn what went so terribly, terribly wrong with the Mitsubishi SpaceJet. Flying into the future. Dreams of a Japanese passenger jet began forming in 2003. These were not firm plans, but between them, the country's government and aerospace industry essentially started to consider what might be possible. At this time, Japan hadn't had a new domestically developed airliner for over 40 years. Its predecessor was the Namsi YS-11, a turboprop airliner that took its maiden flight way back in 1962. The YS-11 was the only commercial aircraft made in Japan after World War II, and it hadn't exactly been a success. Deliveries began in 1965 and continued for just under 10 years before the venture was wound up again. Demand had predominantly been from Japanese airlines, so once this need had been met, sales slumped. The collective behind its production, the Nihon Aircraft Manufacturing Company, ended up in debt, and so it was these shaky foundations that any new project would need to be built on. With funding from the Japanese government and local aerospace firms, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries began leading a research and development project to explore whether a regional jet was even viable. They had 5 years and 50 billion Japanese yen, around $420 million, to make their case. But even in these early days, not everyone was convinced. Kawasaki Heavy Industries publicly chose not to put itself forward for a role in the project. A representative said the firm had doubts that there was a market for another regional jet. As if to prove the skeptics wrong, Mitsubishi followed these development studies right to the Paris Air Show. There, as we've heard, it publicly unveiled concepts for the Mitsubishi regional jet. With a strapline, "Flying into the future," the MRJ promised the dual achievement of top-class economy and outstanding cabin comfort. Said to be 35.8 meters long with a 30.9 meter wingspan, it would be a 90-seat class aircraft. This was already a step up from the very first concepts Mitsubishi had considered. Initially, the company had been looking at a much smaller aircraft, seating between 30 and 50 passengers. But in 2005, it had switched focus to the 70 to 90-seat category. Although larger, for airlines, it aimed to deliver reduced fuel consumption and lower operating costs. All sounds great on paper, but yeah, it's a long way to go. Even Mitsubishi admitted that for the project to get off the ground, pun intended, there was a lot of work to be done. For the MRJ to become a business, its various technologies would need to be developed, verified, and certified. It would need more development funding, as well as a solid sales strategy and customer support structures. But first, it needed to convince those prospective customers. A few months later, in October 2007, an all-important sales push began. Unsurprisingly, Mitsubishi's first and easiest win was on its home turf. After weeks of deliberations, Japan's All Nippon Airways placed an order for 15 regional jets with options for another 10. The first aircraft was expected to enter service in 2013. With those orders in, work could begin. In March 2008, the aircraft program was officially launched. Behind it was an all-new subsidiary company, Mitsubishi Aircraft Corporation. This would be kept separate from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which already built aircraft parts and components for companies like Boeing. Mitsubishi Aircraft's focus would be to drive the jet's development and, of course, push for more orders. It was hailed as Japan's first company to manufacture and market original passenger jetliners, fueling the long-cherished wish of a Japanese aircraft industry. This statement hints at elements of the why in this project. With strong government backing, was the design and sale of a Japanese aircraft a purely commercial enterprise, or was it a matter of national pride? With the 1960s-era VS-11 long mothballed, marketing around the regional jet seemed to almost adopt a symbolic return to industrial strength, one that Mitsubishi described as epoch-making. It was even suggested that the company's work would cause a positive ripple effect in other Japanese industries. In short, this one project could become a cornerstone in the country's long-term industrial development. Now, those are a lot of hopes to pin on one venture, aren't they? But rather excitingly, the ball was rolling. In its 2008 annual report, Mitsubishi included an optimistic account of the revolutionary regional jet. It estimated that the market it would be going into was extremely large, with demand for more than 5,000 aircraft in the next 20 years. The new project was given a home of its own, a factory at Kamaki Airport in the city of Nagoya. This was a site with historic importance. During the final years of World War II, it had been home to the Imperial Japanese Air Force, and as such, the whole area had links to the manufacture of wartime aircraft. It was in Nagoya that Mitsubishi designed and produced fighter planes like the A6M0. In practical terms, a base here made sense, but it probably didn't hurt morale that Nagoya was also the heartland of Japan's former airborne glory. In its short lifetime, the Mitsubishi Regional Jet, or MRJ, went through various design iterations. When it was debuted at the Paris Air Show, its concept was that of a best-in-class regional jet aimed at global regional airlines. For context, it would be going up against the likes of Bombardier and Embraer, which were the two dominant players in the regional market. At the same time, things were changing. Since around 2006, demand for the once popular 50-seater jets had been waning. Instead, airlines were looking to invest in those seating 70 passengers or more. As we've already heard, this influenced the early change in Mitsubishi's approach from a smaller jet to one seating between 70 and 90 passengers. They weren't the only ones to make this shift. Already, Bombardier had the 90-seat CRJ-900 and Embraer the 94 to 106-seat Embraer 190. According to a Forecast International study at the time, it was predicted that in terms of production value, the two companies would take over 82% of the market share. Between them, that equated to $65.8 billion. So, yeah, this was a sizable market to be in, and yes, demand for jets like Mitsubishi's was rising. But it was also a market with some very big players. To break into it, Japan's regional jet would need to offer something seriously compelling. In 2007, there were a couple of differences that did define it. For a start, Mitsubishi aimed to make this the first regional jet with an all-composite airframe. It proposed using carbon fiber reinforced plastics for the wings and the empennage. This would reduce the airframe's weight and lower maintenance cost. Composite materials, like carbon fiber, are considered good for aircraft because of their strength-to-weight ratio. They're lighter and so save on fuel. They're also less prone to fatigue and less likely to crack in the way that aluminium can. The MRJ would also be the first to feature Pratt & Whitney's Geared Turbofan, or GTF engine. After years of development, the program to develop the engine officially launched in 2008 around the same time as the MRJ. From then, it became known as the Pure Power PW1000G family. The engine's geared turbofan technology promised to be the quietest and most efficient in its class, flying passengers further on less fuel. So, how's it work? Well, the conventional jet engine features a large fan which is driven by a combustion system. This produces most of the engine's thrust. As air passes through the core of the engine, it is compressed to become combusted gas. This gas then drives a turbine, which in turn powers the fan. In an engine like this, the fan and turbine share a single shaft, which makes them move at the same speed. But in Pratt & Whitney's geared turbofan engine, there's a gearbox between the fan and the core. This means that the fan and turbine can each run at their optimum speed. They're not tied to the speed the other is moving at in the same way as a conventional option. The turbine can be smaller and faster, while the fan is larger and slower. Thus, the engine is lighter and more efficient. A larger fan pushes more air, creating more thrust and using less fuel. And because the air is moving slowly, the whole thing is quieter. In fact, in early marketing, Mitsubishi estimated that the MRJ would generate a noise level 10 decibels less than that of its competitors. That's the engine. But now let's talk about the plane itself, or should I say, the planes, because there would be two iterations of this regional jet, the smaller 70 to 80 seat MRJ-70 and the larger MRJ-90 with between 86 and 96 seats. The second's larger version would be the lead model. There was also talk of a stretched 110-seat version, the MRJ-100, which might come out in the future. But spoiler alert, it didn't. As a regional jet, the MRJ was, as you've probably guessed, designed for regional flights. Its range would be enough to fly, for instance, from Paris to most of Europe or from Chicago to most airports within North America. For passengers, the MRJ's key feature was the most comfortable cabin element. In 2008, its so-called passenger-oriented design included a new slim seat, large head and foot clearance, large overhead bins, and a barrier-free lavatory, which is better for those using wheelchairs on board. For airlines, it was being pitched as the most efficient aircraft. There was that next-generation Pratt & Whitney engine, a composite structure, advanced aerodynamics, and a human-centered cockpit. Mitsubishi selected Rockwell Collins to provide the primary flight control computers for its fly-by-wire system and the plane's pilot control system. But these initial plans would not stay valid for long. The metaphorical ink had barely dried before changes were being made. In 2009, just a year after the program's official launch, Mitsubishi rolled out extensive alterations to the MRJ's design. Its carbon fiber composite wings were swapped for aluminium after it transpired that using composites didn't actually bring down the wing weight. And based on feedback from airline executives, Mitsubishi combined its front and rear cargo holds to form one larger rear compartment. It also expanded the cabin and fuselage, creating a wider, rounder cabin with more head clearance and overhead baggage space. The drawback was that this added weight to the structure, which would go on to be an ever-present issue for the regional jet. These changes had a knock-on effect on the MRJ-90 schedule. In September 2009, Mitsubishi announced that its first flight would be pushed out by around 6 months from late 2011 to mid-2012. The smaller MRJ-70 was predicted to follow about a year behind. This delay also meant that the MRJ-90's final design freeze was moved by 6 months too. But when that was done in the middle of 2010, no more changes could be made. And so, on the 15th of September 2010, Mitsubishi announced that production had officially begun on its regional jet. The delays. So, by 2011, sales of the jet had risen to include an order of 100, 50 firm and 50 an option, with Transstates Holding, a US-based airline holding company. Mitsubishi proudly said, quote, "The reputation of the MRJ is improving as development progresses," end quote. But not everything was going smoothly. As industry writer Gregory Pollack observed, sometime between the start of assembly and the 2012 Singapore Airshow, something had gone terribly wrong in Japan. In an airshow press conference, Mitsubishi aircraft executives revealed that the program was once again undergoing a rescheduling. In fact, what they were facing was a major delay, one spanning 18 months. This meant that aircraft certification wouldn't take place until the second half of 2015, and it was all the fault of some subpar paperwork. When Japan's Civil Aviation Bureau took a look, it was not happy. Marketing director Yugo Fukuhara admitted that workers hadn't correctly documented changes they'd made to the fabrication process. This meant that the processes that followed didn't match what appeared on the documents. On top of this, there wasn't enough evidence of testing and analysis. "We didn't think we would need so many documents," Fukuhara said. "It took a longer time than expected." And this was a blow to morale. But the course of true airborne love never did run smoothly. Luckily, these hiccups did nothing to put off other buyers. As 2012 closed out, the regional airline, SkyWest, headquartered in Utah, placed an order for 100 MRJ-90s with an option for another 100. Delivery was scheduled for 2017. As we know, the aircraft was already behind its original schedule. At the same time, Pratt & Whitney were announcing a delay of their own. Certification of the PW1200G, the geared turbofan engine now designed for the regional jet, was pushed back to late 2013. In press releases, the company insisted it was on track and on time to deliver the first engine. But by August 2013, there were more delays. Mitsubishi Aircraft announced it would be changing the expected delivery date of its first MRJ-90s yet again. Instead of delivering the regional jet in 2015, it would now be 2017. The company's CEO, Taraaki Kawai, said that the team had underestimated just how long it would take to validate the safety of its manufacturing process, commenting, "This is new for us." He was confident that they could meet the new deadline, though. Needless to say, that was overconfidence because they couldn't. But in a victory of sorts, by 2014, Mitsubishi finally had its first assembled aircraft. A rollout ceremony attended by employees, executives, and government dignitaries marked the apparent achievement of a decades-long dream. And in November 2015, it flew. One triumphant news report wrote that, quote, "Japan's hopes of becoming a global player in commercial aviation were given a boost," end quote. An MRJ-90 test aircraft had made its maiden flight, taking off from Nagoya in Japan and spending around 90 minutes in the skies. Its pilot for that day described it as a, quote, "significantly comfortable flight." But testing would need to take place in both Japan and the United States. So, just under a year later, test flights began in the US too. The first MRJ-90 aircraft took off from Washington's Grant County International Airport on the 17th of October 2016. Following this, Mitsubishi shared its plans to base 4 of its 5 test aircraft in the area. The quiet airspace around Grant County made it a good location for flight testing. By this point, as one commenter noted, Mitsubishi had committed around 180 billion yen, or $1.7 billion, to the project, but it declined to say how many MRJs it needed to sell in order to make a profit or to break even. Its flight test seemed like a small victory, but you've guessed it, there were more delays in store. In January 2017, Mitsubishi Aircraft admitted there'd be another 2-year shift in the schedule. Its first MRJ-90, which had been expected to mid-2017 and then mid-2018, was pushed to mid-2020. Once again, there were issues with meeting the latest certification requirements. The new revised end date placed it a whopping 7 years behind the original deadline announced in 2008. On a conference call with reporters, Mitsubishi's Yugo Fukuhara said that during the aircraft's latest review, authorities had determined that its design didn't account well enough for extreme conditions like a water leak or explosion in the avionics bay. For this reason, the company was forced to begin a new and probably very expensive design review. There was another issue too, and it stemmed from the weight problems that we heard about earlier. Even this long after its US customers had committed to orders of the MRJ-90, it still didn't fit within US weight limitations. These were set out by pilots' union scope clauses for America's Big Three network carriers. Delta Airlines pilots, for instance, had just agreed to an 86,000-pound maximum takeoff weight with no more than 76 seats on an aircraft. The MRJ-90's maximum takeoff weight was 87,303 pounds with between 88 and 92 seats. This meant that SkyWest and Transstates Holding couldn't actually agree on firm delivery dates for the planes that they'd ordered. If they took them, they wouldn't currently be able to operate them on the airlines. In an interview that must have made very awkward reading for Mitsubishi, SkyWest's chief executive, Russell Charles, said the ongoing delays caused by these scope clause disputes made their order more and more unlikely. Until the weight issues could be resolved, he added, SkyWest wouldn't be a real serious candidate for sales. One solution would be to convert the company's order for the MRJ-90 to the MRJ-70. If you remember, that was the smaller brother option with conveniently fewer seats and a lower takeoff weight of 81,240 pounds, which is well below the threshold. When SkyWest originally placed its order in 2012, it actually included the flexibility to make the switch from one model to another if needed. But the MRJ-70 was still under development and a year behind the 90. At the earliest, it wouldn't be ready until 2019, and for Mitsubishi Aircraft, this would be a less compelling competitor to something like the Bombardier CRJ-900. So, it was back to the drawing board. In the meantime, though, money was becoming a major headache. For the 6 months leading up to September 2018, the MRJ program lost 47.2 billion Japanese yen, sitting on top of an 110 billion yen deficit. So that's not exactly ideal. In a final throw of the dice, its parent, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, injected a fresh 220 billion yen, around $1.94 billion, into the venture. SpaceJet. So, with a huge amount at stake, there was another redesign on the cards, but this one would be more drastic than ever. It was unveiled, once again, at the Paris Air Show. Just before the 2019 show, Mitsubishi Aircraft announced that it was rebranding the disastrous MRJs. From now on, they'd be entering the era of the Mitsubishi SpaceJet, a family of aircraft especially tailored for US airlines. The MRJ-90 would become the SpaceJet M90, and instead of the MRJ-70, the company would develop the SpaceJet M100, a 76-seat variant that would deliberately meet US scope clauses. The M100 would be just over a meter longer than the scrapped MRJ-70, but 1.3 meters shorter than the MRJ-90. Where the 90 had been too big and the 70 too small, it was the Goldilocks of regional flight. At the Paris Air Show, Mitsubishi showcased a mock-up of the new SpaceJet M100 cabin, which would set a, quote, new standard in regional air travel. Echoing earlier marketing for the MRJ-90, the M100 would feature the roomiest economy seat and the greatest capacity overhead bin. Rather than simply relabeling the two-class MRJ-70, Mitsubishi had redesigned it to allow extra space for first premium economy and economy classes. In essence, it delivered a more premium passenger experience. And when asked about what inspired the name SpaceJet, Mitsubishi responded, space to reflect, space to breathe, space where it matters. Steve Haro, the company's vice president, said it came out of a company mantra to find space where it matters. To decrease weight, Mitsubishi would feature smaller winglets and use aluminium lithium alloys and carbon fiber reinforced polymers for more parts than it had on the MRJ-90. This dedicated targeting of the US market seemed to pay off. The regional carrier, Mesa Airlines, signed on the dotted line, placing 50 firm orders and 50 options for the M100. Obviously, though, these kinds of design changes couldn't happen overnight. With everything back in the works, the M90 SpaceJet was now gunning for a 2020 entry into service. Coming even later, the new M100 wouldn't be seen in the skies until 2023. As ever, though, the program's river of money had dwindled to more of a trickle. According to one source, insiders reported that developing the MRJ-90 and now the M100 had racked up costs of $8.5 billion. Another $3.5 billion would be needed to complete certification, and in the meantime, there was a new CEO at the helm, a man who was reportedly keen to take a more disciplined approach to project finances. It was time to start stemming some of those losses. On the 18th of March, 2020, a test M90 aircraft bearing the new SpaceJet name took off on its maiden flight from Nagoya. It was the first of many planned, both in Japan and in Washington. It was the start of what Mitsubishi described as certification for the SpaceJet M90's final configuration. Surely, nothing could go wrong, right? But of course, this is 2020, so yeah, things could definitely go wrong. As the test M90 was soaring, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Mitsubishi closed its US operations and Canadian engineering center. Travel restrictions and falling demand for flights prompted an obvious and catastrophic knock-on effect across the aviation industry. It was just another blow to this seemingly doomed project, and it was only going to get worse. By reframing a huge part of the project to satisfy US scope clauses, Mitsubishi Aircraft had essentially put a whole lot of eggs in one basket. The M100 was the plane specifically aimed at the North American market and the concept that airlines were now signing up for, which makes Mitsubishi's next move a bit of an interesting one. In May 2020, the company announced that it was suspending development of the scope-compliant M100. Its annual report revealed crippling losses on the SpaceJet program, which threatened to absorb the profits from Mitsubishi's other operations. For the previous financial year, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries had made a 29.3 billion yen operating loss, around $270 million. That was thanks, in no small part, to a 263 billion yen loss at Mitsubishi Aircraft. That's around $2.4 billion, by the way. It was hoped that pressing pause on the M100 would allow them to stick a finger in the proverbial dam, but instead focus all of their efforts on achieving type certification for the M90, which still awkwardly wasn't within scope for US airlines. SpaceJet's budget for the coming year was halved, with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries CEO cryptically saying, quote, "We have to reconsider how we move forward," end quote. To make matters even worse, the company was already locked into a deal to buy Bombardier's CRJ, or Canadair Regional Jet program. The purchase would cost them $550 million, along with liabilities of $200 million. This might have seemed like a great move when it was announced back in 2019. Taking over the CRJ would give Mitsubishi a ready-made support network in Montreal and Toronto, along with access to the other program's customer support functions, service centers, and engineering capabilities. But, oh, the difference a year makes. As the closing deadline rapidly approached, the folks at Mitsubishi must have kicked themselves. All the same, just days after development was suspended on the M100, the sale went through, adding new support and service capabilities, as well as another whopping expense on the cost sheet. With flight test aircraft grounded in Nagoya, the M90, which had seemed to be nearing certification, again stalled. The delivery deadline on its comparatively small order of an All Nippon Airways, the order that started it all, was pushed out again to 2021 at the earliest. Industry news outlets started speculating that it would never happen. One asked, has Mitsubishi just killed the SpaceJet? And as the months passed, the bad news just kept rolling in. In October 2020, Mitsubishi announced it would be cutting SpaceJet's budget once again. There would, it said, be, quote, a temporary pause on the program. A business plan focused on how Mitsubishi Heavy Industries would minimize costs relating to the regional jet. Ominously, it mentioned the need to shift away investment from SpaceJet. As a result, its budget for the 2021 financial year was just 20 billion yen, or $148 million. And that might sound like a lot, but it was small fry compared to the company's 2018 plan, which had allocated 370 billion yen, or $2.74 billion. Skeptics claimed the program was dead. But other reports were more optimistic. Some sources claimed Mitsubishi was expecting the market to lift from 2024. The company refuted claims it was all over for SpaceJet, saying it was merely continuing a detailed review of the schedule. So, maybe, skepticism aside, the pause really was a pause. Maybe not, though. Losses. The signs for SpaceJet were not great when, by April 2021, there were reports that Mitsubishi Aircraft had laid off or reassigned 95% of its employees. Its once sizable workforce was reduced to just 150 people. In October, the company told the US Federal Aviation Authority that the program was on a 3-year pause. It wouldn't be seeking that all-important certification, at least for now. In an email to the FAA, Mitsubishi's head of certification, Akuya Mashikito, said there was, quote, no plan to restart the program as of now. He revealed that flight test vehicles had been moved into long-term warehouse storage and confirmed that large numbers of employees had moved on to start new jobs. Which certainly sounds a lot more like an ending than a pause, doesn't it? But in the meantime, Mitsubishi Aircraft still had customers waiting for their orders. Admittedly, if this were an upmarket restaurant, those airline bosses would have walked out for a takeaway pizza long ago. But aircraft production was always going to take a bit longer. All the same, there are waits, and there are waits. And with so many delays and pauses, what remained of those hard-won contracts was left up in the air. Some airlines had already cut their losses. The first to break cover had been Transstate's Holdings. They'd cancelled their order for a firm 50 SpaceJet M90s and 50 options back in October 2019. After 10 years, the aircraft they'd ordered still wouldn't be flyable in the US. Next up was Aerolease Aviation. In January 2021, Mitsubishi announced its contract with the Miami-based aircraft leasing company had ended. Back in 2016, Aerolease had signed for 10 firm orders and 10 options on what was then called the MRJ-90. In cancelling the order, its managing partner, Jeb Thornton, was surprisingly gracious, saying he still saw an opportunity in the market for the regional jet and hoped they'd be able to revisit it in the future. With things seeming to wrap up, it was only a matter of time before others followed. Orders for customers like SkyWest and Mesa remained on the books, but there was no immediate prospect of them actually receiving anything. In April 2022, aerospace websites reported that one of 5 SpaceJet M90 prototypes had been taken out of storage and quietly dismantled in the US. This plane, with the registration JA23MJ, had already been painted in the blue and white livery of our Nippon Airways. So, it was no great surprise when, in February 2023, Mitsubishi finally pulled the plug. A full 20 years after the project was first dreamed up, and a decade after it was supposed to enter service, it was all over, with very little to show for it. In a statement, the company said it had, quote, failed to confirm sufficient business viability, end quote. An ongoing saga of delays, technical issues, and soaring costs had taken its toll. In 15 years of development, the company had spent an estimated $7.6 billion on the project. It wasn't the only one to hit hurdles, though. The regional jet market hadn't blossomed quite as those early forecasters had thought. Its competitor, the Embraer E175-E2, was hit by the same scope clause issues as the M90 in the US, prompting one reporter to describe it as dead in the water. By investing so much in a concept that was unsuited to US airlines, Mitsubishi had made a fatal misstep. In a summary slide, the company detailed the many reasons it was discontinuing the project. These spanned everything from its prolonged development to recent pilot shortages. But it also cast a certain amount of blame outward. Global partners who hadn't cooperated and scope clause conditions that hadn't been relaxed. Those pesky, stubborn unions. The following month, images emerged on social media showing a second M90 prototype being dismantled at Grant County International Airport. Japan's vision of a homegrown passenger jet was literally being shredded. And that's pretty much the end of it when it comes to the Mitsubishi SpaceJet. But it might not be the end for those dreams of recaptured aerospace glory. In 2024, just a year after the SpaceJet program ended, Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry announced it would be part funding a new project. It would be channeling 4 trillion yen, or $26.5 billion, into a scheme to create a next-generation passenger aircraft. Scheduled for completion sometime after 2035, this sustainable aircraft is set to be hydrogen-powered. As such, it'll fit with Japan's plans to be carbon neutral by 2050. But the Japanese government isn't the only one interested in a move of this kind. A hydrogen plane is also on the cards for Airbus, which is aiming to have its Zero-E aircraft entering service in the 2040s. And so Japan is seemingly putting itself in the race all over again. It's still early days, so we don't know a huge amount about this latest project yet. We don't know, for instance, whether Mitsubishi will be involved or how long it might take for the requisite technology to mature. Tellingly, Airbus has already delayed its own plan once, blaming slower-than-expected developments. So, will this succeed where the SpaceJet and the earlier YS-11 failed? Well, you can bet we'll keep you posted. And in the meantime, thank you for watching.